because for the last 5 months, like our lives were so simple, and we knew what we were doing and we didn't have to worry about anything else except eating and kayaking towards the Atlantic Ocean. And it was this truly empty feeling of like, now what?
Welcome, Darcy. I'm so happy to have you on Owning Your Legacy. And if you could introduce yourself for our listeners, that would be fantastic.
My name is Darcy Gaechter, and I'm the first woman to kayak the Amazon River from source to sea. Also a business owner of Small World Adventures, guiding kayakers in Ecuador. Author of Amazon Woman, which is a book about life and the trip down the Amazon, and a keynote speaker. I work for the Leading Authorities Speakers Bureau, giving talks to folks who want to hear a little inspiration.
I heard you speak about your book, and the stories were amazing. And so, I feel like so appropriate to life. Like, I loved how you were blending them in and talking about like team dynamics and stuff. So I can't wait to dive in with you and go a little deeper on some of that. But before we go there, I'd love for you to share with the listeners your backstory, because it's pretty cool.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here. It's great to be able to share my story. And I guess the quickest version of the backstory is I've always been very short and small and just puny looking, but I've always really loved to do athletic stuff. In high school, I was really into team sports, and then later I got into skiing and kayaking, and basically just spent my whole life listening to people try to talk me out of what I wanted to do, because as they said, I was too short or not strong enough or too female to do these things. And so I feel very fortunate that something in me just had no desire to listen to them. I already had my own image of myself, and it didn't fit with the judgments these people were making of me. And so I just kind of got extra determined to do what I wanted to do and prove them wrong. I mean, that wasn't the only motivation, but it was kind of a added benefit.
So when was that first time, not to interrupt, I still want to hear the story, but when was the first time that, because you said, I know I did a little bit of reading up and listening to some podcasts that you've been on, but that you were a real stubborn little kid. So what was the first time that someone said no to you and you were like, what?
Well, that was probably my parents when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and they wanted to go ski powder. And the deal was they would leave me at home until noon. So they would go ski powder by themselves and then come get me at noon. And I would just have the biggest tantrums because I wanted to ski powder, and they were right. I'm sure I couldn't have, and they wanted to go have fun. But that was the first thing that I really remember. But kind of in terms of like later in life, I started playing volleyball in high school, and I had like a 29-inch vertical, and I was a really good hitter, even though I was really short. And the head coach said, "You're too short to even bother trying to play in college." And that really was the time where I was like, I am going to play in college, if nothing else, to prove her wrong. And I did, so that felt good.
You did? I didn't know that. You played in college.
Yep, I went to Skidmore College for 2 years and played volleyball, and then I really missed skiing, so I transferred to Montana State after the second volleyball season.
Gotcha. Oh, that's so cool. Did you get a scholarship or?
I did. It was a small, not Division I school, so they did partial scholarships, which I got, and I had a really amazing coach there, a Puerto Rican woman who recognized my potential and really helped me to achieve it. And yeah, I did quite well there. So that was a good feeling. And, like awesome. Good reinforcement to just keep doing what I believed I could do. And so, yeah, that for sure made it easier when I transitioned to the kayaking world, which it's gotten a lot better now, but it's still a very male-dominated sport. And especially back then, I probably went years without seeing another woman on a class 5 run, which is the hardest runnable classification. And so it was just really common for me to show up at the put-in. I was always with Don, who's my boyfriend of 20 some years now. And, no one would ever question him because he's a 6-foot-tall dude. And they would always come up to me and say stuff like, "Are you sure you're good enough to do this run?" And of course, as confident as I could be, it like does something to your psyche.
Oh, totally.
So then I would be there like, oh, I think I'm good enough. I hope I'm good enough. And you don't want doubt when you're about to go do a really hard.
Some life-threatening sport for sure. So what would Don say? Like, did he like beat the shit out of him?
No, because I kind of would get mad at him if he tried to stick up for me. I was like, this is my battle. Don't.
I get that. I totally get that.
And I mean, the one thing I will say about Don is that he has never been that way. He has never doubted me, or, if I say that I can do something or I want to do something, he's like, great, go for it.
That's the perfect partnership, quite frankly. It's someone cheering you on to go out of your comfort zone.
And I definitely should put more stock in what he says, because he's someone that knows and loves me. And then to let strangers come in and kind of shatter all that is an annoying thing, but it definitely happens.
It happens to the best of us. It's so true. So true.
Yeah.
So, okay. Love where you're going with this. It's very interesting. So yeah. So you're told you can't do it. And then you're like, yeah, right. Gonna do it.
And yeah, so when I was growing up in the kayaking world, I started kayaking when I was 19. And there was all these kayaking videos, and it was probably 10 years in to watching kayaking videos when I finally saw one woman on the kayaking video. And so, yeah, I think I really wanted to change the idea of what women were capable of doing. Like, I didn't set out to get on the videos. That wasn't my thing, but I just wanted to show up at the rivers and do what I knew I could do. And so it was like a very small effect, but every time I paddled with some new group of guys, they were like, wow, you're a really good kayaker. And so it maybe changed their perception just a tiny bit to maybe make it so the next time they met a woman on a river, they were a little bit nicer.
How about basketball right now, with the woman from
Caitlin.
Iowa? Yes, Caitlin, who apparently a family friend of ours son took her to prom, which is really kind of cute. But
wow.
I mean, I think she's like doing exactly, it's being that role model is what you're talking about. Or, you only had one or two role models, and then you seem to be like the beacon of light for other young women that might want to do it, or even men's perspective changing. I think that's huge.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot to what people say, if you can see it, you can be it. If you start looking at a kayaking magazine and there's not one woman in it, it's easy to think, all right, this isn't the sport for me. And so
I love that saying so much. It's one of my favorite sayings. And I'm on the board of a group called Female Strong, and it's for young women, 6th grade to seniors in high school. And that's totally our saying. And it's an entrepreneurial class. They take like 22 weeks, they go on Wednesdays, and they come up with their own business is the moral of the story. And then they have to present their business to like a Shark Tank investor panel, which I am always on, and I love it. And it's amazing watching these young women, their confidence growing, their just even the way they speak and their creativity on the businesses that they come up with. They have to do P&Ls and what have you. But we always say that the whole thing about Female Strong is if they can't see it, they can't be it. And you got to get them young. You got to really show them very young.
So then I guess, well, part of it too, this is what I just was talking about at the high school graduation, but I struggled for a while after graduating, not really knowing what I wanted to do, and kind of quickly realized that kayaking was my passion, but I was like, this is a dumb passion, and where is this going to get me in life? Was my thought. But I kind of made a deal with myself. I was like, you can have 5 years to go kayaking, and then you have to, in my mind, I really thought I would like go join the Peace Corps and then figure out something good to do for the world. But as I got more into it, like during those 5 years, then I started working as a guide. I became an owner of the business. And I just realized that it was possible to keep kayaking and do all the other things that I wanted to do, which was, give back to the community, be able to be a role model in some capacity. And, I don't know if owning a kayaking business is really a respectable career, but,
of course it is. It's totally a respectable career. What did you major in?
History, and then I got a master's in environmental history with the plan to do a PhD and become a professor. But in that process, I was like, I enjoy this, but I don't love it. And I thought this is something I could put up with doing, but it's not something I'm passionate about doing. And so, I went back to kayaking, and being so immersed in the sport at the time that I was allowed me to say yes when this opportunity to kayak the Amazon River from source to sea came up. And then that Amazon trip gave me a topic worthy of writing my book about, which, my whole point with the book was to hopefully encourage other people that may have heard in their life that they can't or shouldn't do things, based on gender, their stature, some personality trait, or sorry, some physical attribute that you can't really do anything about.
External expectation, right?
Right, totally.
Yeah, I read that or was researching you, and that it was, what did people say? It was a crazy endeavor. I'm using the wrong words, but like inappropriate endeavor. Is that what they used to
Right.
say? Like, this is inappropriate, and like, what does that even mean? And why is it yours to judge that? It's my endeavor, you know?
Right, exactly. And I mean, I feel like when I was growing up, things were a lot better for women than like my mom or my grandmother, but there still was this expectation that I would get married, that I would have kids, that I would have,
Right.
some kind of normal career. And I've never felt like a huge need to conform, but even feeling that way, it was really hard to break the mold. And I was constantly feeling like I had to defend what I was doing, and so it's kind of come full circle now with the book being out and this sort of new side career with speaking jobs. People do respect what I've done finally, but it's been after 2 decades of, Darcy, when are you going to quit goofing off and kayaking all the time and get serious about life? And so,
That's a good lesson right there, Darcy. I think of I'm thinking of I have a 24-year-old son and a big gamer and a creative writer, just graduated from Iowa in creative writing, and I can't even remember who exactly said this to me, but they're like, don't underestimate this gaming thing. He could turn that into a career. And
right.
his dream career is to write like the storyline of the gaming, like they're movies now. Like I don't game, so I don't
Oh,
really know
yeah.
except watching the boys play, but it's like there's a storyline there and they're, whatever. And so I think that's just a great lesson of trying really hard to follow your passion and what you love and making a career out of it.
Yeah. And I think if you're like passionate about medicine and saving people's lives, it's like an easy, obvious choice. But
Right.
if your passion is gaming or kayaking, it can be a little more murky of how you're going to make it all work. But I think if
Right.
you are dedicated enough to it and work really hard at it, things often work out. So,
Yeah. And I know when you guys are doing your the trips in Ecuador, that doesn't sound easy. Like maybe describe like what a day in the life of that job looks like.
yeah, the Ecuador season is awesome. I love it, but it is full on. So we're there running trips for about 4 months every winter, and the trips are a week long. So guests come for 7 days of kayaking. And it's hotel based, and we've got cooks that cook our meals. So that part's all taken care of. But, the one group kayaks on Saturday and goes home that night. And then we pick the next group up Sunday morning. So it's Don and I, and we've got 5 Ecuadorian guides, 2 Ecuadorian cooks, and 2 Ecuadorian drivers. And we all basically work 120 days in a row. And yeah, we're up at 6 doing emails and then having coffee and breakfast with the guests. And then we take them kayaking all day and go check out hummingbirds or something at night. And it truly is amazing in 2 parts for me. One, we have a really amazing Ecuadorian community and staff right now. So that part feels really good. And then showing all these people, like for a lot of them, they've never left the US before. And this is their first exposure to travel and different cultures and seeing the rainforest. And so it's really awesome to get to show people those things. But it does take a lot of like conscious managing of our energy, because it's just, we go, it's like a big endurance race, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And very extroverted. It's not, I mean, even though I'm sure you can like sneak away into your cabin or whatever, but you have to be on for
Yeah.
120 days pretty much with your guests.
And that is funny because I really feel like I'm a huge introvert. But one thing I've worried about whenever we decide that to quit Small World Adventures in Ecuador, I'm like, then I might never speak to another human again if I'm not forced to for 4 months.
And look at what you did. You put yourself out on a speaking tour. So
I
that's
know, and it's
hysterical.
very scary, but it's definitely an adrenaline rush, just like kayaking is for me. So I love that.
You're really so good at it, and you're so disarming. And I just, when I saw you speaking at Flavor and Extract Manufacturers, I was like, oh my God, you're so good. And just even the way you started it just was perfect, and
Well, thank
it
you.
really puts the whole room at ease, So you're very good at it, even though, yeah, I have to
That
speak a
means a
lot of
lot.
times,
Thank
and
you.
I get scared every time. Like it never gets easier. So yeah, I like all this too. Like I really do. Appreciate the fact of not meeting other people's expectations and doing what you can do, because I get that. Only woman flavor company owner, and a
Right, right.
huge long history of flavor companies. They're 100 and X years old. And when I went to that event that you spoke at, the first time, I was 25 with my husband at the time and our 18-month-old baby. And I was the heir apparent of the company that I run, but nobody knew that. They thought my husband was, I was just a wife. So I totally relate to so much of this. And yeah, and it's come a long way. But even of that association, so I was just president, which was huge. I was the fourth woman in 125 years as a president of that. So
Congratulations. That's amazing.
thank you. But yeah, it was, and it was hard. It was a hard road. I mean, that was a hard road. It was an old boys club, and it's definitely, and that was like my wish, was to help change the culture there. So yeah,
Right.
totally get that. So it's important work that you're doing too.
Yeah, and I often see too many women listening to all this sort of noise of the world and saying, and it is easy to do if everything you hear is against what you want to do, then it's easy to think, well, maybe I am wrong. Maybe this is not possible for me. And I too often see women turn away from what they want to do because they're listening to that stuff. And so, yeah, with the book, with these talks, I mean, that is the main goal, is to try to get women, or anyone honestly who's been told they can't do something, to not turn away from what they're passionate about doing. Just keep
Right.
fighting.
And I read something you said that I thought was awesome. It was, well, maybe I'll ask you it in a question and you can say it if you know where I'm going with this. But when you feel like it's hard to get up and train and you're tired, or even get up and do and your trips, so what kind of motivates you and gets you out of bed in the morning?
Are you steering me towards the quote of just proving everything wrong? Proving everyone wrong?
No, but I love that one. No, I'm steering you towards when you're not doing it for yourself, that it gets easier. Like,
Oh, right.
I thought that was really cool. I like that motivated you to, even when you're really tired, to keep going, because you said something like, if you only inspire one person. And I'm like,
Yes.
so true. So that was beautiful.
So I
So,
do, have you heard of he's recently passed away, but he's a psychologist who studied like the flow state, and he studied happiness. His name is very difficult to pronounce, but it's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he wrote a book about the flow state for athletes, for artists, for business people. And he spent a lot of time studying like how can people who have lived through really hard lives or a ton of adversity still be happy, still be motivated, still be positive. And his whole theory is, if you are thinking of or working towards something greater than yourself, you can deal with so much more adversity than if it's a more selfish pursuit. Because the more selfish it is, it's easier to kind of fall prey to the thinking of like, why is everything going wrong? Why is this happening to me? But if it's some bigger purpose, you can more easily get up in the morning, fight through whatever billion of obstacles are in your way, and just keep going. And so I
what a
try to keep
perfect
that in mind.
segue to the Amazon. I think that's a perfect segue
That's
of
a great segue.
how you made it through that, to me, nightmare trip. No, parts of it sounded absolutely beautiful, but yeah, tough stuff. So I think that, yeah, I'd love to hear more about, and I want to know how Midge is doing now, quite frankly, because I don't think that anybody asked you that when you were at FEMA. But
All right, yeah. So the Midge she's referring to is David Midgley, and he was the instigator for the Amazon trip. And he basically was having like a midlife crisis, and he's a brilliant computer programmer, but wanted to have one big adventure to make himself feel like he was more well-rounded. So he did all this research and during that time, he ran across the statistic that said more people had walked on the moon than had gone down the Amazon River from source to sea, and that no one had ever kayaked the whole Amazon. So people had traveled from source to sea, but they either hiked around the whitewater or rafted it or some other craft. So no one had kayaked the whole way. So David Midgley, who we call Midge, decided that's what he would do. And when he decided that, he'd never been kayaking before and he'd never been camping before, and he really is like not an athletic guy. But he started coming to Ecuador, and the first time that we met him, he said, hey, you guys need to teach me to become an expert kayaker, because there's, a month of hard whitewater in the Amazon headwaters, and I need to be able to do the whole thing. And we, honestly didn't believe him that he was really that serious, but we're like, sure, we'll try. And he trained with us for a decade. So, and he really organized like almost everything in his life towards training for the Amazon, with fitness, kayaking. He quit smoking, jungle survival courses. Like, he did so much stuff. And then after a decade, he felt ready, and he invited Dawn and I to go with him. And so we did, and that was in 2013. The three of us kayaked the whole Amazon. So we became the first team to do the whole thing in kayaks, and I became the first woman to do it. And Midge,
And you're still the only woman to have done it, I believe, right?
still the only woman, yeah.
That's amazing.
When I was writing my book, it took me 6.5 years from when I started writing it till when it got published. And my mom would like periodically call and be like, is the book done yet? And I'm like, no, Mom. She's like, well, you got to hurry up. What if another woman kayaks the Amazon and writes a book before you do? And I was like, Mom, I
don't think there's 10 women lined up to do the Amazon from source to sea, but maybe. But I see what she's saying. But yeah, the book writing is, I'm in it too, and I'm in third year, so it's hard.
But anyway, Midge, so he like thinks about the world very differently than I do. And when he was training for the Amazon, he was like, I don't even really like kayaking. I'm only doing this for the Amazon. And we're like, no way, it's got to be fun on a certain level. But he was kind of true to his word. He said he was going to quit kayaking after the Amazon trip. And he pretty much has, except he met his wife through the London Kayak Club where he lives, and she has made him go one time. So it's been a decade since our trip, and he's gone kayaking once, and he's back to computer programming, which he loves. And it's like this chapter of his life is completely closed, and he's moved on, and he's happy about that. So
that is very, 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 very interesting.
It is.
And then he met his wife through that. Does she still kayak though? Like, is she still part of the club and loves it, or?
No, I think their big thing, recreational thing now, is skiing, and they have 2 kids. And I think she was never as passionate about kayaking as he was, but now for fun vacations, they go skiing in the Alps. So that's their thing together.
That's pretty good. Well, yeah. He found a life partner out of it, so that's
Yeah,
not bad at all. Yeah.
Exactly.
So tell us more about some of the I love some of the adventures that you guys had to endure on this, and how long it took you, and some of those awesome details. The 10 years in training alone blows my mind.
Yeah, Midge was incredibly dedicated, and it speaks volumes to what people can accomplish, because truly he is not naturally athletic, and he did transform himself in a decade from just a computer programmer who didn't do any sporting stuff to a guy who could kayak one of the hardest rivers on earth. Like, still to this day, 4 people altogether have kayaked. The Montaro River is the name of the river all the whitewater was in. That's the headwaters of the Amazon. And our team of 3 and 1 other guy has kayaked it, and that's it. So
wow,
that's really saying something.
And you said something like very few, how many, something like 5% or something of kayakers can do level 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's 5% or less, I would guess, of all the kayakers in the world. Like, it does.
So how many of that must be women? Must be like 1 to 2?
It's getting so much better. Just recently I did a class 5 river when there was 2 other women on the trip, and like, that was awesome, because usually it's me and a bunch of guys, or maybe some other woman and a bunch of guys. And so, yeah, it's getting much better, but I'm sure of all the women kayakers in the world, maybe like 0.5% run class 5.
Well, congratulations on that. That's huge. Wow.
And, it sounds really cool, but there are very few kayakers in the world. So the percentages get kind of skewed.
Right.
One story that I didn't tell in the FEMA talk that was one of my favorite parts of the Amazon trip. So we had a month in the whitewater and then a month in the red zone, which is flat water, but a dangerous part of Peru. There's a lot of like narco trafficking and illegal logging and stuff like that. And then as we got out of the red zone, every night we were camping in villages down in the flat water because everyone said, don't camp in a secluded spot. It's too dangerous. Find a village, ask permission. So we were doing that. And shortly after the red zone, we were walking up asking permission. And there was a very serious volleyball game going on. And it was all women. And I was like, what is going on here? And I watched for a while. And then I asked one of the women if I could play. And she looked at me and was like, I think so. I start talking to her. I'm like, look, I'm pretty good.
No, really, I'm pretty good. That's hysterical.
I was like, please just let me play. And so finally she let me play, but then her teammates were like, what are you doing letting this lady join us? And I did well. Like, thank goodness I played in college because it was like all I could do to keep up with them. Like, they were amazingly good. And then at the end of the night, at the end of the game, our team won, and the other team was like forking over the money. So I was like, oh, they're playing for money, so this really is serious. And then I didn't take my part of the winnings. I just let my team have it. So then they were all like patting the woman on the back who had decided to let me play.
Well done. Well done. It's almost like a pool shark. You're like a pool shark there.
Yeah, exactly. But then after that, like, I didn't get to play that much more, but every time we got to a village, I would walk around and be like, is there any women playing volleyball? Because that was like one of the unexpected, really cool things on the Amazon.
That is very cool.
And a nice way to hang out with the local people, so.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like a visual I would not have of women being able to even do that. Like, I don't know, just that you'd think they'd be dealing with chores and things like that, to have that kind of downtime and be able to connect like that is pretty cool.
It was very cool. And if you want to hear the temper tantrum story now.
Wait, before you go to this one I don't remember you telling either, at least at FEMA, and I don't know where I heard it, but when Midge got stuck in that really scary dynamite part, right? I think, that was,
this was maybe 2 weeks into the trip, and we had to paddle through, we were in the super deep canyon, Whitewater Canyon, and they're building a dam on that river, which we knew they were doing. And we had meetings with the project engineer before we left, and he really tried everything in his power to talk us out of kayaking through this area. He's like, we'll pick you up, we'll drive you around, you just shouldn't do this. And for Midge, it was extremely important to kayak every inch of the river or it wouldn't count for him. So we're explaining this to the engineer, and he agreed that he would get his workers to stop dynamiting while we paddled through, because they're building a road down into the river, and it was, like at least 1,000-foot cliffs on either side. So they're dynamiting to get the road in. So we paddle up we had the GPS coordinates where the construction started. We got out the satellite phone, called the engineer and said, hey, we're here. Can you stop dynamiting? Then we waited for his call back saying, okay, all clear. And it was only 3 kilometers. So we sort of calculated that we would need 5 hours or something like this. Mm-hmm. But what we found was just an insanely altered riverbed from all their dynamiting. And so there was boulders the size of school buses and the size of houses that they had blown off the cliffs that had fallen into the river. And then all the water was flowing underneath the rocks instead of over them. And so from a kayaking perspective, that's just like instant death. And so we were having to do these very difficult portages that included roping the boats up and out, like up cliffs and then rappelling back down. And it was just taking a lot longer than we had thought. And we hadn't seen any workers yet. So I was sort of operating under the assumption that they also hadn't seen us. And I'm like, they're going to just start work again in 5 hours. So we need to hurry up and get out of here. But it was really hard because it was the kind of situation you didn't want to rush through, because it was kind of, the shore was unstable. So any misstep, you might fall into the river. If you were kayaking in a hurry and not, making sure to scout things out first, you might accidentally go into one of these unrunnable rapids. So It was just all in all super high stress, and we're maybe at like the seventh or the eighth hour, and we finally see some workers. So then at least we know, okay, they know that we're still here. And we get out to scout this really big rapid, and Midge didn't want to get out and scout because he was really tired. And so Don and I said, okay, that's fine. You just wait here in your boat. We'll go look. And it was a runnable rapid. It just had this massive, what we call a hole or a hydraulic feature at the top. So that's where water's like pouring over a rock and it's recirculating on itself. And so, if you tossed like a floaty log into it, it would just stay on the surface getting trundled.
Right.
Or if you tossed a kayaker into it, it would just stay on the surface getting trundled. And so we had stopped in an eddy, which is a calm spot on the left side of the river. And we found there was like a, 2 foot wide, we call it tongue, a passageway past this hole on the right side of the river. And as once you got past that hole, it was just big, but everything was okay down into the next eddy or stopping point that we could see on the right. But then we couldn't see around the corner after that. So we knew that this one section was okay, but that we had to stop in that next eddy to find out what was downstream. So we go back, we tell Midge, you can see where we need to go from our eddy. We basically say, get to the other side and get as close to the cliff wall as you can. And we peel out to go. Dawn went first and Midge went second. And Midge, probably just from being extremely tired, didn't quite make the traverse across the river. So he didn't make it to the safe spot to pass the hole. He dropped into the hole. And then I was last, and as I went past him, I saw him like getting sucked back into what looked like the worst part of the hydraulic. And so, my mind just starts racing, and it's like, okay, Midge is going to swim, which means he's going to have to get out of his kayak and be swimming in the river. And I just told myself, if you can get him into the eddy, do it. And if you can't, you just have to let him go, because, we had encountered so many unrunnable rapids in the last 7 or 8 hours that we kind of had to assume that around the corner would have also been unrunnable. It would have been stupid for all of us to go into it chasing Midge because we might all die.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was just this crazy moment of calculating how much risk we could take. And then also the next thing that flashed through my mind is, what am I going to tell Rachel? And that was his girlfriend, who's now his wife.
And did you talk about that? Like that one just stuck with me. Like, before you even went on this adventure, did you guys ever talk about that? Like, what do we do if, I mean, or is that too deep of a conversation to even have?
Well, no, it's kind of like a given or an unspoken rule in whitewater and in rescues. Like the number one thing that everyone is taught in any kind of rescue is look out for the rescuer first, because you don't want to add to the problem. And so, yeah, when you're at a team like that on a river, that your friends, your teammates will do everything they possibly can to save you, but you also know there might be a limit to what they can do. And that's kind of a thing with running Class 5 whitewater. It is definitely a team sport, and you need good people who are going to have your back. But there's also this acknowledged risk that, don't run a rapid if you think you're going to need help, because your friends might not be able to get to you, and that is just a known thing. And so, so we had conversations about that. Midge had done like swiftwater rescue training, both with us and with other people. And we did not talk about what are we going to do if one of us dies, what would be the contingency plan.
And I like also that you say, I mean, so much of this is like relatable to so many things in life. I like, don't do it if you think you're going to bring somebody else down with you. It's just, that's crazy. But making decisions in fear, I think you talked about that too, of like, how did you calm yourself down to not be making decision in fear on that,
Yeah, that is the absolute hardest part of kayaking, or any sport or business or public speaking.
Yes.
trying to calm yourself down enough so that your brain is not in that like fight or flight mode. Because I don't think you think all that rationally when you trigger that part of your brain, you know, the reactionary part. And so for me, it's always a matter of just taking, you know, it can be even just 3 seconds and taking some deep breaths. And, you know, that's one of honestly the best things that kayaking has given me in my normal life is when like the brain starts to feel overwhelmed, and it could be stress, fear, panic, whatever is causing it. It's like, I know now to just take my 3 seconds and breathe deep and be like, don't do anything. Even if it's a total emergency, taking those 3 seconds is probably going to be worth the time in order to up with a clearly thought out plan rather than just a reaction.
True. It's very true. Yeah. Whenever I make decisions based out of fear, I never like the decisions I make.
So there I am thinking, what am I going to tell Rachel? And, you know, Midge does argue with me a little bit on this point, but I was like, right as the hole should have just completely annihilated him, it like pulsed and released him and like shot him down the river. And he was upside down, but he was able to roll back upright. And then me and Dawn both just immediately started screaming at him to catch the eddy to stop, which he did, which was awesome. And then we did portage the next rapid. Like it was possible to run, but it was huge. And if Midge had swum through it, it could have been a very different outcome. So
And he was probably exhausted. You probably all were at that point.
Yeah. And Midge said, so he read the book and I put that in the book. And he's like, Darcy, you're not giving me enough credit because I had Dawn's words in my mind of all the whole escape practice we had done in Ecuador. And so I was doing those things and I got out.
It's more dramatic though, that like the river's alive.
I'll give Midge and the river credit.
Yeah. Good idea. Yeah, that sounded very, very scary. Very. But I'm glad it ended well.
Yeah, me too.
So team dynamics also is part of this story that I liked, but talk a little bit about that of how I like how you talk about, you know, we were three equals and really even trying not to let you and Don get, you know, too much against Midge. Like that could naturally happen, not against, but you know, you're a couple and he's not part of your couple, and how you navigated that. And we would call that in like at work sometimes it's like piling on, you know, like you have two against one is never good. Never ever, nothing good comes of that either. So love to hear more of that team dynamics and how you guys dealt with that.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that if you have to spend 24 hours a day with the same three people for 148 days ever, it's going to be hard. And then all the adversity and discomfort of being on the Amazon added to that. So all in all, I think we did pretty well. But yeah, we definitely had some difficult times. And the relationship was interesting to start with. So it was very much like a client, which was Midge, and guide, which was Don and I, relationship for those 10 years while he was training for the Amazon. And then we tried to establish that, no, we are going to be a team of three equals out on the river, but Midge was paying for everything. And so sometimes like he kind of used that power dynamic. And then sometimes Don and I would use the power dynamic of like, well, we know a lot more about the situation right now, so you need to listen to us. And so there was always that tension, but I think we managed that fairly well. And then when I started off, or when Midge agreed that the three of us would be a team, which by the way, he also did a lot of research and found that 3 was the ideal number for an expedition. And if expeditions had more or less people, they were much more likely, statistically speaking, to break apart partway through. So he was happy with the 3, even with the dynamic of Don and I being a couple. But I was so determined, like, not to side with Don just because he was my boyfriend, that I think I ended up being way more mean to Don than was necessary. Or, you know, I would, if he, you know, brought up some complaint, I would be like, no, Don, you're wrong, you know, just not trying to side with him. And so that that was definitely a failing on my part. But yeah, and then one other interesting thing, which I can't remember if I mentioned in the talk or not, but whenever there was something outside of the three of us, some like outside challenge, the whitewater, we had to really work as a team to get through that. The red zone, we had this external threat from all the people that might want to kill us. We really did so well as a team in those situations. And when we had no outside threats, we like just turned on each other. And like that was when we fought the most. And then something massive would go wrong. And it was just like someone flipped a switch and we were a great team again dealing.
Isn't that interesting? I find that so interesting. And we just had a cyber event at work, which was not fun. It ended fine, but when you were saying that, it just made me think of that. Like, I was in awe of how my team rallied, did stuff.
Nice.
We kept calling it analog. There's no computer. I mean, you got to figure out the old days of how we made stuff and did stuff, and there's been definitely a couple instances in my work world life that happens, and it's so true. And I've even heard some like coaches or mentors or whatever say, sometimes you have to create those events to get the unity.
Right.
Which feels kind of, I mean, that's fake then. Like, how do you do that? But I get the concept.
Yeah. So then, I guess all of us had moments or days or weeks even where we were feeling low, and then some people were feeling energized, and we had a joking thing of every day someone was designated chief morale officer. And it was basically whoever like woke up with the best attitude. And their job was to try to remind the others that might not be feeling as good about things of, why we were here, what we were doing, like the goal for the day. And that was, definitely started as a joke, but I also think it ended up being something kind of helpful in the end. But there was a time after we had passed Manaus, so we've probably been out there like 100 days already. And the paddling had gotten much more difficult because now the river was completely flat. It was like being in a lake, and there was constantly a really strong wind blowing upriver, like strong enough that if we stopped paddling, we would blow back up the river. And then we were also dealing with tides, because tides come up the Amazon more than 600 miles. And so we could only basically paddle 6 hours a day when the tide was going out. And it was always like a struggle to make good progress in that time against the wind. And Midge was just having a bad, honestly, week or 10 days. And, like nothing in my psychological arsenal had helped. I tried, encouraging him, being nice, and then threatening him, like, your decades-long dream is falling apart in front of your eyes, Midge, come on. It just, nothing was working. And so, one day we paddled 4 miles in an entire day's worth, and our support boat that we had with us at the time, they're like, basically, you guys suck and you're just wasting our times. You should just go home. That was kind of like, yeah, you're right. We totally do suck right now.
I didn't think the support boats were allowed to say that. You suck.
They were like, they really wanted to go home to their families at that point. So in their calculations, us just quitting was going to get them home a lot faster than us going all the way at 4 miles per day, which was true. Yeah. So I just got really mad at that point. And I guess let me just back up a little bit. One thing we also did was whenever we like made this rule, whenever someone was feeling upset about something, they just needed to say it out loud instead of keeping it in and getting more and more mad about it. And that was really helpful, because once you say it out loud, I think you, the person being annoyed, can see like, okay, maybe this isn't such a big deal, but also just by telling Midge, hey, it makes us feel uncomfortable when you're lording over the money over us. And he's like, oh, okay. Like, it just helps so much. But anyway, down here, now we're at day 113, actually. And I'm really mad and I don't say anything. I'm just getting madder and madder and madder. So I broke that rule. And I really decided, since nothing I was trying to do was helping to make Midge more motivated, I decided that Don and I needed to ditch him and finish, because we were getting kind of close to the end. And I just knew that Don and I could do it. And so I didn't tell Don any of this yet, but I went to bed that night, like, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna tell him we're gonna like get up at midnight and we're just gonna leave. And
We're just gonna sneak out. We're gonna sneak out of
sneak
camp.
out. We're gonna sneak out. And I'm like, Don and I are strong and we're motivated and we can finish this thing. But if we stay with Midge, I'm like, we're never gonna finish.
He's a boat anchor.
Yeah, exactly. So I go to bed that night and I'm just like so emotionally distraught because I know that it's so wrong to leave Midge and it's his expedition and we're there to help him. So I know that's so wrong, but I just like cannot imagine staying with him either. So the next day I get up and start paddling, and the river is huge by this point. You can't even see across it. And we had to cross the river in our kayaks a few times, and the last crossing took like 4 hours just to get across the river. So we had also made a rule that we needed to stick close together in case someone swam out of their kayak or had a problem. And so I'm like, Don, I was like, I'm too pissed off to paddle near you guys. I'm just gonna go in the back and you just need to leave me alone. And he argued for a while. He's like, we need to stay together. And I was like, I'll stay 100 yards behind you. I just can't deal with, I'm gonna say something I regret to Midge if I paddle near him. So I'm in the back and it was surprisingly calm. So I didn't have my spray skirt on, which covers the cockpit area of the kayak. And I'm just paddling along, getting madder and madder and madder. And then I see this cooking oil jug float up the river and it's going upriver. So then I'm like, damn it, now the tide's coming in and there's litter in the river. And I just get so mad about all this stuff. So I raise my paddle over my head and I try to smack the piece of trash, but I like reach so far out over my kayak that I just tipped over and fell out because I didn't have my spray skirt on. So then I'm literally like swimming and I had like my Crocs fell out of my kayak, my iPod fell out, I had some extra clothes that fell out, my sun hat fell out, and I'm just like swimming, collecting all this stuff, chucking it back in the kayak. And I really had this like out of body experience where I was just like watching this ridiculous scene from above. And I was like, Darcy, you are such an idiot. Like, this is so embarrassing. This is so ridiculous. And then I just started laughing because I realized like I was being so stupid. And I was like, what do I care if I'm stuck on the Amazon for an extra couple of weeks? Like, it's amazing here. And people would like kill to get the chance to do this. And it was like a truly amazing change of perspective for me. And after that is like, I had zero anger left. I mean, truly, I just realized like what an idiot I was being. And I was like, you know what, Midge, let's do this as long as it takes. I don't care. And then when I said that to him too, he got all motivated again. It's like, that's all he needed to hear. And
Oh,
then
that is interesting, right? That's like a big coaching thing right there.
right, exactly. Yeah, like pressure of me wanting him to go faster was holding him back, you know?
And it was just a change in your perspective. I think that, yeah. And I can just picture you and you're pretty even keel human and having this absolute temper
call
tantrum.
me emotionally boring, and I think that's true.
It's a compliment, really. It's not a bad thing to be. Okay, we're getting to the end here, obviously, but I think the last little tidbit before we get to the legacy part is when you guys got to the end and you accomplished the decade-long dream. So talk about how you felt when you had reached, the shore. I know that you got to the GPS site, but when you like, how did you feel?
It was a funny feeling because we had, maybe 5 minutes of really nice celebration. And, Don had brought a bottle of champagne that him and Midge shared. And it was like, we had all been dreaming about this moment. Don and I, for the 148 days we were out there, Midge for 10 years. And it was like, this is so cool. We're finally here. And then I can't speak for Don or Midge, but for me, after 5 minutes, it was this, not panic, I don't know, like this empty feeling and like, oh crap, what are we going to do tomorrow? Because for the last 5 months, like our lives were so simple, and we knew what we were doing and we didn't have to worry about anything else except eating and kayaking towards the Atlantic Ocean. And it was this truly empty feeling of like, now what? And that was a big surprise for me. I've read about it since. It seems like a relatively common thing in big expeditions. So if I had done my research, I maybe wouldn't have been so surprised, but not knowing anything about it, I was like, well, where is this coming from? Why can't I still be happy about this? So
Right.
that was really interesting.
And you kind of hear about that too with people that write books, or that
Yeah.
have big events in their
Projects
life,
at
like that
work.
big projects. Yep. That
Yeah.
it's like, okay, now what? It's
Yeah.
probably has something to do with our identity, right?
Yeah, totally.
And having it be bigger. I mean, that's kind of hard to imagine bigger than kayaking the Amazon, but yeah, like then, okay, now what's my identity?
Yeah, and it's just for me, it was so nice to have like a clear, simple objective every day. And then it was like, we're going back to messy life and
Yeah.
complicated life, and we got to think of a new goal. But yeah, what's going to top the Amazon? Like, how do we
And
even?
how did you get you guys fired? Because you never said this on one of the podcasts I was listening to. You're like, I got us fired. And you said you just had disagreements, but I don't know if you could share like what those
Yeah,
were.
so the guy who bought our company, this is like a whole nother side story. A client approached us like in 2012 and said, hey, I want to change my life and buy your business. And we thought, wow, somebody actually wants to buy a kayaking business. This is weird, but yes, we'll sell it. And so we worked with him for a year, like as part of the contract, training him up. And he just had such different ideas about how to run the business. And we were kind of like, well, we've been doing this for a long time and we know what works and what doesn't work. And like, I love that he wanted to grow the business and make things better and he had money to put into it. So all of that was good, but just some of the client relation aspects, I was like, this just isn't working.
Values. It was values, probably. Your values were probably very different.
So at the end
Yeah.
of that season, like I had a little bit of a hard time being fully honest with him about what I thought was good, what I thought was bad. So I just wrote him this really long email at the end of the season, like laying it all out there. And then he read the email and asked for a phone call. And so I called him and he's like, hey, I read your email. And I think, oh, and part of that, I asked permission for Dawn and I to go to the Amazon because we were supposed to work for him for 2 years as part of the contract, but the Amazon trip would make us miss half a season. So he calls and he says, I think you and Dawn should go to the Amazon and just never come back. And I was like, I don't think he means he wants us to die. So probably he means he's firing us. So I was like, are you firing me? And he's like, yeah, I guess I am. And then I was like, what about Dawn? He's like, yeah, Dawn too. And then he like saw a friend and just hung up on me. So I was, and I was like,
That's
Dawn, I have some bad news. I was like, I don't do that anymore.
well, that helped make your decision of, and maybe you already had it made, but that made it even more clear. We're going to the
Yeah,
Amazon.
totally. We were free and without anything to worry about. I mean, except for like figuring out what to do with the rest of our lives.
that little piece, but now writing this book, I think you're going to be busy. Well, I have loved this conversation, and I equally loved it as much hearing you speak. So on that note, I want to hear, and this is probably the stupidest question for you, but what is the legacy you want to leave behind?
So I thought about this a lot after the phone conversation with your team, and it's something that used to make me incredibly mad, but I have had so many times in my life after a hard river or like I got a little bit into trail running after a really hard trail run, I would meet complete strangers that didn't know me or know anything about me. And they would ask like, oh, did you just do that run? Did you just do that river? And I would say, yes. And then they would say, oh, if you can do it, I can do it. And I would get so mad about that because I was like, you don't know who I am or how badass I am or am not. Like, why are you equating yourself with me? So that would just make me furious. But I think that I want to own that, like not be furious about it anymore, because that is honestly a big part of my message to people. Like if I can ignore all these people's judgments, or at least take their judgment and use it as fuel to prove people wrong, to do what I want to do, then you can do that too. So I think that should be my legacy. If I can do it, you can do it.
You're kind of flipping it, you're
Yeah,
flipping it on its head.
exactly.
So yeah, when I like just been researching and listening to you, I see you as like a beacon of light. Definitely a beacon of light of helping people realize that anything is possible.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
No, I mean, I think that's really cool stuff. So I would love for you to tell our listeners where they can find your book, where they can find you, and a little bit about like what kind of speaking you like to do. You know, I think some of the topics that you hit on are really relevant.
So of course, all my social media handles are my first and last name, Darcy Gaechter, which was a bad choice because Gaechter is really hard to spell, but maybe they'll
I would
see it.
not have pronounced your last name that way at all. So I never even asked you how you, I always thought it was like, I'm not sure how I would have pronounced it, but anyway.
People say it like Gesture, but
Yeah.
Gaechter. Yeah.
Okay, Gaechter.
Oh, Darcy Gaechter on Instagram, Facebook. The book, people can, I actually also have a website, which is darcygaechter.com, and people can order the book directly from there or on Amazon if people want. And it's, again, I should really take a class on like internet marketing because the book title is Amazon Woman, but if you type that into amazon.com, you will not find my book. You're going to find some weird stuff. So type in Amazon Woman and Darcy.
That's interesting. I was thinking you needed, and it's probably impossible to trademark that though, because it is a great name.
Be good. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Darcy, for joining me on Owning Your Legacy. It has been such a pleasure, and I feel like the content and the value that you're putting out there is just phenomenal. So keep going, lady.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.